With Bill Habermel. He is the former superintendent of education, and he's now moved on to the private sector, and he happened to get a grant for a new program, and he has some money available to him, so he's my new best friend. But that program is to not just get GEDs for inmates, but it is actually to get high school diplomas for them. And on the back end of that, they also have some money available to reach out to private employers and to incentivize them into hiring some of these folks. And so that's one effort. We're working with a few of the larger companies right now, IBM and a couple of others, to try to do some of those things as well. And we have a department chaplain, his name is Sandy Otsuji, and he has not been involved in our inmate reentry programs before. He's primarily a representative of the department that we bring to crime scenes and other things when there are traumatic things that happen. Well, he heard about our programs. He's now engaged us for about the last 9 months, and he is creating a public-private partnership with churches and public employers, and we're going to put a whole marketing campaign together to try to reach out to some of those businesses. Here's the challenge of that. A lot of times we hear from companies and from people who in theory want to support this, and then what happens is the real world kicks in, and that person shows up in the workforce, and it is not a Hallmark movie. You are going to have people with tattoos on their necks, and they come from backgrounds that they don't understand how to behave well or appropriately in certain situations, and so it tends to lose steam in some places, and some employers are not necessarily as happy with what that represents when their customers come in. And so they think they want to help, and then when they see the realities of the world, they tend to filter out. And so we have to find committed partners. It's not an easy thing to start, and it's not an easy thing to sustain, but it is absolutely something we're working on.
I've got a question here.
In the back.
Yes, thank you, Sheriff, for your comments. I'm really excited to hear about some of the things that are changing. And my name's Tina Marie, and I'm with an organization that Jeff knows called Rowan & Schuster, and we do legal advocacy and life coaching to assist people who have barriers to employment. And we're both in Orange County and the Los Angeles area as far as the people we work with. And a lot of what you're sharing, I'm seeing some transition going on also in Los Angeles County. And what I wanted to touch on was what you're referring to with the work barriers. And where I think what you're bringing up is a very key point, is that one of the, some of the experiences we've had is that employers do want to do something, but there needs to be bridges. And one of the things that Jeff and I have chatted about in the past, and what I want to really kind of hit on with their mentoring program, is really allowing that to take place. The mentoring of having someone that's kind of a coach, assisting that person, especially through the interview process and the staying on the job process. Maybe having something similar to what we're trying to implement right now in LA under parole is for helping the person have almost like a big brother connection. And possibly also using some of our lifers who are coming out now on parole, who are amazing people, and having them also assist in the mentoring process. Some of the guys and gals that are having to go back in and out because they haven't learned some of the changes that need to be made. So I guess my question back to you is, maybe there's some opportunities that we can offer too. And also, if you think the community aspect of making sure that the community understands and supporting that process and having more advocacy going on in the community, would that be also a service, I guess, to the Sheriff's Department?
It would, and we actually, I gave a tour a few weeks ago to one of the members of the Board of Supervisors, and we actually walked into a class where they were teaching people how to interview, actually going through role playing and dressing them up in a shirt and tie, and that's a very awkward thing the first time people do it. As was mentioned, I grew up in Hawaii. We don't wear shirts and ties. When I first applied to the Sheriff's Department, I had to go buy a tie. It's just not something that some people are comfortable with, and certainly knowing that you're going to be asked some hard questions, how to respond to those, how not to offend people, all of those things are life skills that these people do not have. And it goes beyond that. How do you apply to rent an apartment? How do you get a driver's license? All of those very base skills that a lot of people take for granted, these folks have never had to do before. And so just getting them comfortable with those things is a challenge. And so we do have some of that in place. Certainly not as robust as we want it, and we would be willing to take advantage of those opportunities. Now, as I talk about this program, I've been doing this with our existing resources, and they are just stretched very thin. And so we're actually getting close to putting out a recruitment for what we refer to as an administrative manager to run that program. And I say that because Jeff is here, and I'm certainly hopeful that he's interested in taking on that role. But it would in essence be the person who has the vision of this and then works to implement it. And certainly, you know, we wouldn't just compartmentalize that person and just say, go do it, and we move on to other things. We would, at a higher level, be involved in it as well. But we don't currently have all of the resources in place to really run this as an umbrella program yet. And there are a lot of other challenges that the county and that the department is facing. And so, to some degree, I have to wait my turn in line to get some of the things that I want and the money for that. And so, that's the direction we're headed. Everybody wants it by this summer. It's going to take us time to build this. It's not something that happens overnight. But I look back to where we were 2 or 3 years ago and where we are today. And so I see progress, but again, it's not as quick and as complete as we would like.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for coming. I think we're a small but hopefully mighty group here. I have an overall question. I've talked to too many people who think that in the prison system is just full of nonviolent users, and people not a threat to society should be out. And the second question I have seems to go the other direction, that the private prison system, you may want to comment or not on this, the private system, prison system seems to be proliferating more sentences and more people, and again, a lot of people are afraid of that. I don't know what the internet has to do with it, but it's probably some of the urban legends.
You know, I often get comments from people who say, you know, if they legalized marijuana, you would empty your jails. I haven't seen anybody in the custody of my jail who was caught with, you know, personal use marijuana or that sort of thing. We just don't have the space for those kind of folks. Our minimum security James Music facility is where we house people who may have multiple drug violations and those sorts of things. But when you talk about those low-level, non-violent, never been in trouble types of folks, I currently run what we call a community work program. So we have people who are convicted to do time in the Orange County jail system, and we put them on work crews in the community, and they may work at Orange County parks, they may work at the harbor. I'm currently working with the fire authority to get a wash crew to actually wash and shine fire trucks, and they live at home and they report to a work site. I have close to 650 people serving their sentences that way. So when you talk about those nonviolent folks, those are the people that we're not even keeping in our jail system. And so when we kind of look at that as an umbrella program, a step down from that is the electronic monitoring. And so some people need monitoring the entire time that they're not in our jail. We have about 100 people that we have out, misdemeanors that we have out on electronic monitoring. Now it gets a little bit tricky because when we put people out on these programs, they have to have a house to live in. And the family members that are there have to be willing to take them in, and they have to be willing to allow us in to make sure that they're maintaining the terms that we put them out. But a large part of our population is actually out of custody, not in custody, and those are the people that everyone says we should be putting out and don't know that we already are. But when it comes to private prisons, there's not an incentive at the county level to try to stock private prisons. Now that's not to say that these private prisons don't approach some of our state lawmakers and certainly try to get contacts. As soon as AB 109 hit, I started fielding phone calls from some of these folks. If we build a private prison, will you send some of your inmates to our private prison? The answer was no. And certainly we want to avoid doing that wherever we can. We want to resolve our problems here in the community. Prison is not the answer to everything. Now, if we reach a point where we've hit saturation and the numbers continue to grow, we do have to start looking at some alternatives. But I think most counties are finding that the private prisons are not the solution. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the state level and state prison level, the union that has the biggest effect on our state lawmakers are the state prison guards. They want nothing to do with private prisons because it diminishes their power. And so, are there people that use the private prisons? Yes. Is it a fix-all solution? No. And quite frankly, here in Orange County, we don't see it as a solution at all.
Do you want to go to your next segment, or would you like to take some more questions?
Wait, wait,
See a
We're
lot of
going to have
hands.
more questions, but I want,
I just want one remark. Remember to tell us what we can do.
yeah,
Okay.
I've got that on my list too.
All right.
Would you like to, I didn't hear it asked.
I'll take a couple more questions,
Okay.
and then I'll get on to the last phase of what I'm hoping to accomplish.
Okay.
Hi. You've been great, and I've really enjoyed what you've had to say so far. I was curious about, when you talked about the 100 million and then the 80 million
Mhm.
and the new design, is some of that going to include, because now that you have the state prisoners that are there for longer periods of time and other kinds, I think the, reentry back into society, the ties with family, although you mentioned that it's not always beneficial, but the way that, like the visiting rooms, instead of through glass, so that if it's a mother, let's say, who's incarcerated, so she can actually touch and hold the kids, those kinds of being able to stay in contact with families, so
Yes.
that it's not just through a phone. And I was wondering if that new design and the visiting room, the longer.
Yes, in some of those housing units, we do actually foresee doing that. Now, there's a few things that we're up against. One is law. We're not allowed to bring juveniles into adult facilities. And so we have to design it so that we can skirt that law a little bit and allow them into certain parts of the facility that the law may allow for. And so that's part of our design phase as well. Currently at the James Music Facility, we actually do have face-to-face visits. Now, there's no physical contact in those. What we did set up when AB 109 first came into effect, the juvenile court judge at the time was Judge Hachimanji, and I met with him, and there's a program in the state prisons where you have children who are wards of the county are actually taken, and a lot of people don't know this, they're taken on buses and they go on a circuit through the state prisons, and social workers will bring them for visitations with their children. And so with the advent of AB 109, we now had some of those people, and that is a mandate that we have to be able to provide that service. So I met with social services, I met with a few other agencies, and at the James Music Facility, we actually set up an area where we had couches and books and playthings, and we said we can do it on Tuesdays in this one area. And then we were told, well, Tuesday's not a good day. Well, what is a good day? So they said Thursday. So we modified everything in the jail so we had a place to do this. And nobody came. And we did it again, and nobody came. And then finally we had an inmate who said he was interested in doing this. And so we set up, one of the requirements was before he was allowed to do this, he had to attend and complete a parenting class. About halfway through, he decided he didn't want to do that. And so they say if you build it, they'll come. We built it and nobody came. And it was very disappointing. But that said, we do see more opportunity to do it. And we couldn't do it in Santa Ana. The way our buildings are structured there, the law did not allow us to have programs like that. And at the security levels that we have in those facilities, it became problematic. And the same thing at the Theo Lacey Jail. So we're actually building this jail with those sorts of things in mind, where we actually have secured rooms, but they'll be built to allow for those sorts of things in there. Unfortunately, again, we're talking late 2017, early 2018 before some of these things start to come online. So it is a challenge. We've tried to do what we can with it. There hasn't been a whole lot of support on that. I was actually a little disappointed after all the effort we had put into it. But it's not something that we've given up on. It's just something that's a challenge.
Thank you so much for your informative talk so far. I wondered if you could speak to the undocumented prisoners and parolees question.
We have a couple of programs in the Orange County Jail. One is what we refer to as 287G. And in that program, we screen everyone that comes into our jail for their immigration status. Now, these are what we hear in the media oftentimes is, you have somebody of Latin American descent that is pushing a cart and they don't have a license to do that, and they're brought into our jail, and then we send them off to their country of origin. We don't have anybody like that in our jail. We won't accept people like that in our jail because we don't have room for them. And so generally, what we will do is we will screen folks. If there is a question about their immigration, we then notify immigration, and it is up to them to place a hold. We do not place a hold on the inmates. We just flag them, and immigration will then review their case. If immigration decides that they want to hold them, then there's an evaluation that's done on whether or not they meet certain criteria to be held in the custody of the Sheriff's Department. It's referred to as the Trust Act, and there were a lot of people that thought that would eliminate a majority of the folks that we have in our custody from being held by ICE. That has not turned out to be the case. We may get 5 or 10 people in a month that previously would have been held, and ICE would pick them up, and now we just release. And so it didn't change a whole lot. There was, I think, a misperception about who we were holding, and that this would solve that. The truth of the matter was most of those folks never even made it into our jail. We have a daily bed rate for immigration detainees that are held in our custody. It's $118 a day. About $24 of that $18 goes to the health care agency to provide health care for folks that are being held by immigration. But what happens is when immigration picks up any of our former inmates and takes them into custody, they don't just transition them over and start paying us for them. They actually take them away from our facilities. We may never see them again. So there's no incentive on our part. I've heard people say that we're stocking the pond, we're putting holds on people, moving them over, and then billing the federal government for them. Those folks are taken away, and in LA, they are processed through. They may wind up, that's where a lot of folks are being moved out to Adelanto. There are private prisons out there that have contracts with immigration. So a whole lot of them are being brought out there, but they are also bringing a lot of them from other places, and then we rent bed space to immigration. And we have a contract with them to hold up to 838 is the most beds that we would be made available to them. Now, we've never reached that number. We're currently at about 650 detainees. And so at the conclusion of their immigration hearings and whatever determination is made, we don't release them onto the street. We don't send them to their country of origin. ICE comes and picks them up, takes them back, and then does whatever processing they need to do. And so we have a good portion of our ICE detainees are housed at the James A. Music Facility, and a lot of people think it is strictly people from Mexico and Latin America. They are from all over the world. In fact, at the James Music Facility, they grouped up by countries and actually had what they refer to as World Cup soccer, and the different countries that play each other. And we're talking Somalia, Romania, the Czech Republic, and all over the world. And so it's a pretty diverse community, and they do not live under the same rules that our inmates live under. They get significantly more access to things, up to and including computers. Okay. Why don't I move on to phase 3? And this is possibly where some of you can have some impact. We currently have about half of our population is unsentenced, meaning they were arrested and charged with a crime, and they are now in our custody. So 50% of all of our inmates are people who have not been convicted of the crime that they are facing. When you talk about creating bed space and opportunities to do other things, when we evaluate, do we really need to have all of these pre-trial inmates in our custody? Now, you have a bail system, and it's a financial system, so if you have the means to get out as a pre-trial inmate, it may not necessarily mean that you're any less of a public safety risk. So, for instance, if you're a major drug dealer and you have financial resources, you can bail out. If you are a low-level street dealer, you may not have the same financial resources. Who's the bigger threat? Certainly both of them pose a public safety risk, but bail is not necessarily keeping people in based on their public safety threat. And so what you're starting to see in California is a new way of looking at our pretrial population. And one of those things is to do a risk assessment of these folks for a couple of things. One, are they a public safety threat? 2, are they likely to show up for their court appearance date? And 3, is there any threat to witnesses or other people that may be involved in the case? And so if you evaluate them and you determine that they are not a threat in either of those 3 categories, then really we've guaranteed they'll show up to court and they're not a danger, so why should we have them in our custody? So as you're starting to see this unfold in the state, this is something that hasn't caught on in Orange County yet. As you can imagine, district attorneys, prosecutors, they want these folks to get through the justice system. They want the conviction. Now, they believe they've committed these crimes, or they would not have charged them with it. But if we put people in their homes, if we put them back into the community, are they less likely or more likely to plead guilty as opposed to being locked up in jail and having an incentive to just want to put it behind them? And so that could potentially clog up the court system if everybody wants to draw out their court cases and tax the resources. So there's a little bit of a worry that if we go to a system like this, the court system will just shut down because you just can't process that many people through. But what we're seeing is that isn't happening. In Washington State, they've gone to a risk assessment rather than a bail model. And now they're a different makeup than we are here, but they were 97% successful with the pretrial risk assessment in getting people to court and not creating public safety issues. Now, when you talk about the population we have here in Orange County, I just saw something in the Orange County Register yesterday that says that we have one of the biggest populations as a county in the nation. I think we're 6th in the nation when it comes to counties. So it's a little harder for us to find people who want to disappear, as opposed to Washington State, where some of these smaller towns, if you don't show up, we're going to know where you're at. And so I don't pretend to say that we're going to have a 97% success rate, but there is an opportunity to look at our pretrial population and to do some of those assessments that I mentioned in some of the programs that we're talking about. So if we do that assessment that talks about what their needs are, what their public safety threat level is, and then we share that information with the public defender, the district attorney, the court, and probation, at the time that that person comes to arraignment, or sometime early on in trial, they may come to agreement on what the best course of action for that person is. And it may be to go directly into treatment services. It may be that they have to come to jail. There's a lot of different avenues that they can go down. But without assessing that person's individual needs, the only thing the court knows is their criminal background and what they're currently being charged with. And when you try to evaluate how to reduce recidivism through that lens alone, you're going to come up short. And so it's a shift in